Welcome to Category Visionaries, the show dedicated to exploring exciting visions for the future from the founders who are on the front lines building it. In each episode, we'll speak with a visionary founder who's building a new category or reimagining an existing one. We'll learn about the problem they solve, how their technology works, and unpack their vision for the future. I'm your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines Media. Now let's dive right into today's episode. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Category Visionaries. Today we're speaking with Derek Szeto, co-founder of Walnut Insurance, an embedded insurance platform that's raised over $7 million in funding. Derek, what's going on?
Thanks for having me. We're trying to preach the gospel of embedded insurance, so happy to chat more and tell you more about what we do.
Well, let's jump right in and talk about embedded insurance, just to give the audience a bit of context. So let's imagine that you're sitting on a flight and a grandmother sits down next to you and asks you, so what do you do for work? How do you explain to grandma what you do?
Yeah, a flight is actually a great example. So if you think about what are the, quote unquote, traditional forms of embedded insurance, we have it in three buckets. One is fully embedded into the product itself. So if you're on a flight and you're traveling and you book that flight using some credit cards, we'll have travel insurance, trip cancellation right on there. So we facilitate that type of coverage for credit cards, including the Tim Hortons card, the Neo Financial card in the Canadian market. We also do data-driven implementation. So if you're at the airport, we also will send messages via partners. We're B2B2C, where we can use the location data to offer you travel insurance while you're sitting with grandma on the tarmac if you haven't purchased it elsewhere. So we're trying to weave ourselves into the customer journeys where it makes sense to have insurance.
And how would you describe the state of just embedded insurance as a whole? I feel like that's a term that I've been hearing thrown around for quite a few years now. What's the state of the market?
Yeah, it's still early. Embedded insurance, like from a theory perspective, actually sort of makes sense for everybody involved. And that's why we're excited about the category. So if you think about, what is people's behavior, I would say most people don't love insurance. We often talk about it as it's not like people wake up in the morning and say, I'm really excited to go buy insurance today. I'm not going to go bang the doors down to buy insurance. So what does that mean from an experience perspective is that it actually makes more sense as a part of a customer journey within platforms. So we talked a bit about travel. There's very common journeys where folks are, renting properties and there's an embedded option to purchase tenant insurance, or if you're buying a home and getting a mortgage, being able to get home insurance, leveraging the data that already exists. So our idea of a good time is that the customer gets the coverage they need, leveraging data that is already being circulated with a partner. The partner gets the opportunity to create more customer stickiness and more revenue through their platform. So that could be in the travel example, the Expedias of the world. It could be the telcos. It could be, fintechs that are offering insurance to their customers. And then the customer is actually a better risk-driven customer for the insurers. And that's the third part of the equation, where there's always some insurer that's underwriting the risk. And if they are offering coverage from an embedded perspective, it's actually better risk because they're getting less adverse selection. They're not getting people that are going out and sort of choosing them because they have that particular risk. So we ultimately feel it's best for everybody in the market.
And how did you end up in this world of embedded insurance? It feels like you must have had some personal experience in the space to end up here, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think there's another one where, most people don't grow up saying they're going to be an insurance broker in the insurance industry. I ultimately sort of fell into it where I was working with my co-founder at RBC. RBC is, Canada's largest bank, and they were trying to go beyond banking and get ahead of the curve, catch up with some of the fintechs. We explored a bunch of different areas, and one of the areas that we became really passionate about was around subscriptions. And if you ask people what subscriptions they have, you would probably say, have Netflix, you have Disney Plus, you have Spotify, you have gym memberships. And those are the top of mind common ones. We connected to people's bank accounts via Plaid. We looked at the data, and what we saw was there's this other thing that looked a lot like a subscription, but people were not raising their hand. They weren't, thinking about it, but they were spending really good money on it. And that's insurance. That could be their home insurance, their auto insurance. It's very sticky. It's the same amount every single month. So it looks and sniffs like subscription, but it didn't get the attention. And that to us felt like an opportunity to go a bit down the rabbit hole. We explored it a bit more within the confines of RBC, and we found that there's a bigger, larger overall opportunity. And this whole wave of technology and folks that now are building digital first platforms where they do have a lot of data about the customer, where they are, engaged with the customer on a day-to-day basis provides a lot of opportunity for embedded insurance solutions and to be able to get to the right customer at the right time. And insurance overall is just a little bit more antiquated industry. I would say generally like a little bit more behind than say, fintech, for instance. And so it's just a large market opportunity that felt untapped, has a lot of need. And, we can work with a lot of partners that we feel just have the right type of customer base that can really benefit from these types of coverages. And so we started this business to really make it easier for partners to offer insurance solutions.
Now you have this idea, like, where do you begin with something like this?
So just started in 2020. So that was about 5 years ago. Where do we begin with something like this? It's really around trying to understand your customer base and what types of product services they need. So we work with some of the traditional, what we think of as distribution points like financial services, fintech, but we also work with a utility, a telco. And these are all folks that have some sort of data and insight. So we talked about the geolocation piece and folks that are traveling need travel insurance. If you are getting a mortgage, you need home insurance. If you're moving into a rental property, you need tenant insurance. So we're trying to find all these journeys where ideally insurance, if it's not explicitly required, it at least makes a lot of sense. We've talked about in the past as well, going after folks that are thinking about online wills, and that could be a moment in a life event that might trigger some thoughts around life insurance. So it's thinking about customer journeys and where they're naturally already gravitating towards some need for insurance as being the opportune times to have further discussions.
When you think about the market category, then it sounds like embedded insurance is the category. What's your point of view on the market? How are you thinking about embedded insurance in a different way from what maybe competitors are?
Embedded insurance is like still sort of very early. And if you looked at what's the percentage of revenue or premiums that are being generated from embedded insurance relative to traditional insurance, it's still going to be very much swamped by traditional insurance. Why we're excited is because of digitization of the platforms, scale of the platforms. And if we think about where we are today versus where we're going to be, 5 years, 10 years from now, there's no doubt in my mind that it's just going to be like a much larger percentage of insurance that is bought through embedded flows and journeys and experiences. And you can start seeing that with folks like, what Tesla is doing, for instance, with auto insurance. They have all the data. It makes it very sort of obvious and straightforward for them to be able to help underwrite policies and be able to reach the customer at time of need. And so the way we think about it that may be a little bit different is that we're an enabler. We're a technology first enabler. We don't have to go in there and sort of run the whole stack. I would say we actually prefer to have partners that have some sort of indication or knowledge on what do they want to be responsible for, what do they want to own, and we can help sort of bring together the rest to enable that. So it might be, they really want to do a home appliance, home warranty program, or they really want to offer home insurance and they don't know which carriers would be interested in embedded insurance experiences. And we can bring, some of the carriers to the table and do the technology integrations, or they might need help with, licensing, or they might already have the whole program figured out and just need somebody with, technology expertise and insurance to be able to help them with that. We're definitely leading with technology, and we're a little bit more agnostic into what exactly the solution has to be. We just want to enable embedded insurance, which ultimately means we're a little bit maybe broader than some of the other folks out there. There's certainly embedded insurance players that are just like, hey, I do travel insurance and I do travel embedded insurance, and that's a big enough market. I can do that all day long and be satisfied. And we want to position ourselves to be the partner of choice for folks with an audience that we can offer product A, and that might be what they have in mind today, but then also, product B and product C and product D, and help them along the customer lifecycle, be a source of one to many products. And we can be very flexible on how much we do across those various products. So, we want to be more technology driven, and we want to be more sort of product agnostic than some of the other partners, so that we can be sort of a one throat to choke choice for our partners to enable insurance on their platform.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode.
And with your customers, are they all in market right now? Do you think, looking for an embedded insurance partner, or are they, do they need to be convinced that they need to go out and try to find something like this?
That's probably one of our biggest challenges. It's sort of developing the market. I think people are very much aware because they're, personally, like everybody has some sort of insurance. So they're already sort of touched by insurance as the broader category. They're not necessarily thinking about embedded insurance, and they're not necessarily going to Google and, typing it in, or going to, ChatGPT and typing it in. So it's a bit of like market education. And if we think about like what a lot of people talk about in the insurance space is this notion of like folks are underinsured. And part of the challenge with folks being underinsured is that if we keep doing sort of the same thing, they're still going to be underinsured. Insurance has been around hundreds of years and will continue to be around hundreds of years more. But if we don't go to market in a slightly different way, then we're still going to end up in the same place. So we would love to sort of spread the gospel and help folks understand, even people that traditionally aren't thinking about insurance, that there's relevant insurance opportunities that we can bring to the table. There's a utility that we work with, for instance, that's called Atco, that we help them with a home appliance, home systems warranty program, because they're already connected to the home. So they already have some right to play, and helping organizations think about what is the data that they have, what is the customer base, what are the commonalities, how do we find the segment within their audience that a product or service is relevant for, and being able to help them, get a product to market that can help improve. Like, they're ultimately after two things. They want customer stickiness, or they want to be able to drive incremental revenue. And insurance can help them do that in a way that in many cases, these are products that they need anyways for the consumer. The only question is where they're going to go and get it.
What about the marketing strategy? If we zoom out, how would you define the general marketing strategy and philosophy?
I think this one's been something that we're trying to figure out over time. So the market education piece, we touched a little bit on, like we, would love to participate in, venues and channels where people are having that embedded insurance discussion. And that's like more qualified if they've already gotten to the point of they're thinking about embedded insurance. So the strategy from that perspective is, we want to be the category leader for embedded insurance. It's a smaller segment of a much larger overall insurance category. But if people think embedded insurance and automatically think about Walnut, that's the win for us. And that's what we're trying to do. And I would say, 5 years in, we've done a pretty good job of that, at least being top 3 in the consideration set, in the Canadian market. And then in the US market, that's something we're certainly like working on more aggressively. But how do you sort of crack the top 3 of consideration for anybody thinking about embedded insurance? And then how do you move your way to sort of being number 1 in embedded insurance as a category beachhead within a much larger category? We found conferences certainly helps. Insurance is still an industry that I think, ultimately there is still a lot of like people to people based interaction. And so trust becomes very huge in insurance, and making sure that, folks can deliver programs and not fly by night sort of outfits, and then being able to display and show customers. So I think that's the other thing that, you've had a lot of B2B entrepreneurs that always helps. It's like, how do you showcase customers? Because we're B2B2C. We're not really trying to build a Walnut consumer facing brand. So folks might not have heard of us directly, but they've probably heard of the brands that, we work with. And so we work with, a Neo Financial, a Coho, a Tim Hortons, a TELUS, many of the largest Canadian brands. And so being able to showcase the brands provides a lot of credibility for us in market that helps get the next and the next and the next client. So it's still a work in progress. We're always looking for tips. We're always looking for other entrepreneurs to tell us what's, worked for them, and trying to make sure that we, bring ourselves top of mind for embedded insurance is ultimately the end goal.
When you think about the entire go-to-market journey so far, what would you say has been the most important decision that you've made, or most impactful decision? And take us back behind the scenes. How'd you make that decision?
I mean, like other sort of entrepreneurs, I think we've made a lot of mistakes in the past. And at the beginning, I think you start a little bit broader and then you sort of refine over time. The most effective for us over the last 5 years has still been, one of two things. One is actually, outreach, whether that's like cold or referral driven. I mean, referral driven is, of course, going to be better if there's some sort of connection or introduction that you get. It's a higher quality signal, but it's harder to scale that. So we've also done like pure cold and had success with that. So that's one. And the second is conferences. We've had a lot of success with conferences, the Money 2020s of the world, where folks are all sort of together in one place, and we can bring a couple of our team into one place and meet with a lot of different clients, whether that's like net new or to meet with existing partners and sort of continue to bring them along the journey and just have more touches. The thing that, ultimately for us probably drove a lot of acceleration is just think about the right products and services to be able to offer and refining that. We actually started in, the life side of the business. So we actually did a bunch of work in life insurance. And what we discovered over time is life insurance in its very end is a much harder product to embed because life insurance is always optional. So one of the things that has driven more engagement is like, how do we think about the things that are required? Things like, tenant insurance as you're signing a lease, things like as your home insurance, as you're able to go and get a mortgage and get into a home and help with those journeys. And we've seen a more of a flow towards some of these, what they would call in the industry, like P&C, property and casualty type of journeys, having higher conversion rates and then really leveraging like the data. It's sometimes not enough to sort of say, hey, life insurance and, for example, online wills sort of make sense, but what is the moment that folks are engaging with life insurance and online wills that makes sense to talk about insurance versus when we were talking about earlier, thinking about geolocation and travel insurance. An airport is a very good signal, or, better yet, if you can get them, while they're using the Wi-Fi on the plane, as an example, that's an even better signal that they might be traveling. So trying to really use the data to be able to drive those interactions versus broad audience is sort of not enough. We got to go a bit deeper and leverage as much of the data as possible.
In terms of milestones, what comes to mind? What's a recent milestone that you're really proud of and perhaps the team celebrated together?
I would say like we're, cautiously optimistic, but what we like to do is to create really compelling, like seamless journeys. And some of the milestones that, we can talk to are, for instance, we've done a lot of really good work around, this creditor insurance debt cancellation space where you can basically, if you're taking on some sort of debt obligation, have a one-click style journey where you can basically read terms and conditions, check a box and be able to have coverage for things like job loss, disability, life, accident. And we've done that with a couple partners like Big and Fora, but seen like really strong conversion rates and been able to do it with a really like compelling customer journey that's like super simple. So, we're very happy with those programs where we can offer and be able to deliver insurance within one click. And we are very happy with the conversion rates on some of these creditor insurance or debt cancellation style programs. So those are some of the big wins for us. And we'll have a lot more in that vein coming out in 2025.
This show is brought to you by the Global Talent Co., a marketing leader's best friend in these times of budget cuts and efficient growth. We help marketing leaders find, hire, vet, and manage amazing marketing talent for 50 to 70% less than their US and European counterparts. To book a free consultation, visit globaltalent.co.
Let's talk a little bit about fundraising. As I mentioned there in the intro, over 7 million raised to date. What have you learned about fundraising so far throughout this journey?
Fundraising is hard. So I think when we talk to other entrepreneurs, there's sort of varying degrees of how much they enjoy fundraising and, whether it was easy or hard for them and some of its timing. The first round that we did in 2020, when I think the market was, hot, was a lot easier than the last round that we did, last year, just in terms of number of meetings, for instance, it would take and, how much time it would take to be able to get to the finish line on these rounds. So I think fundraising still feels like an art to me versus a science. And one of the things we've learned over the last few years that you really have to run it like a sales process. So I think first go around, we probably had a spreadsheet that we contacted a bunch of folks and that maybe, was enough for that. But as we got a bit more sophisticated, it became much more of a CRM, driven process, more like pre-work. So trying to identify the most likely of the investors to be willing to close, even if they're willing to have a conversation. Is it a fit? Are they, going to like be interested in that category? Are they going to be interested in that geography? Are they writing sort of checks of the size that are relevant, to their fund? And can you make a meaningful contribution to the return? So more pre-work, versus probably the way we were doing it out of the gate where, really just having a bunch of conversations and, tracking the conversations that we have. Like now we do a lot more homework before we even get started. And as, I think you get further in the sort of life cycle of, raising Series A and so on rounds, I think we're going to see even more of that. So, it's like any other sales process, heavy on the CRM is probably what I would say.
What about priorities for 2025? So we're somehow already one quarter in. I don't know about for you, but for me, it seems to be flying by. What are the big priorities and objectives for the year?
Yeah, I think we can't avoid talking about AI. I'm sure you've had, lots of guests, and that is a hot topic for everybody. We're trying to figure out how do we use AI across the organization to accelerate the business. So if we think insurance is traditionally a little bit behind and there's folks that aren't necessarily even using APIs as much as we'd like to see in market, AI is like another leap ahead. So what we think of as like, what can we do in the back office or internal facing that customers might not see? And then it's like, what are things that we can put in front of, the customer that they might see? And there's just so much opportunity. Here, like a really like simple example, things that people are already like doing today. I am sure there are folks that take an insurance policy that they get, whether that's like a life insurance, home insurance, auto, travel, whatever it might be, commercial insurance, and they throw it into ChatGPT and ask it, like, summarize this for me. Like, what am I missing? What are things I need to know? Because they're mostly unlikely to read a 20, 30, 40 page policy document full of language that is not going to be familiar to them. So on the consumer side, like trying to get a better understanding of your policy, leveraging AI, I think is like very valuable. And how do we bring that forward in some of our experiences? And what else can we do to sort of leverage, maybe AI to be able to have almost like advisor on demand, 24/7, 365 potentially, and, a multitude of different languages that we could never staff for otherwise. So now that's more of the external facing. Internal facing, it's like, what can you do with AI to sort of speed up some of your, workflows? How do you get more productivity and more product ship, more features, out by leveraging some of the AI sort of coding tools, the Windsurfs, the Cursors, the Kleins of the world? ChatGPT released like for the 4.0 image generation yesterday. And I don't know if you've played with it or seen it, but like, I think that's incredible, like what they've been able to do. And it's so fast. And like, I actually find it's like hard to keep up. So, I can't escape like trying to really inject AI into everything we do, because we already see just tremendous like ROI and value in terms of the tools that we're using today. And we're really like the starting gate of that. And, we as a technology forward insurance industry, like, business, want to be sort of a leading adopter of AI within the insurtech space.
Final question for you. And I'm sure we just touched on that a little bit with the AI answer there. But if we zoom out, let's go 3, 5, 10 years into the future, what's the big picture vision look like?
A more embedded insurance. We would love to power all of the embedded insurance, but we don't need the consumer to know it. So we would want to see all the consumer facing brands, all of the folks that, have highly active mobile apps. Fintechs are a great target. There's a lot of overlap with financial services and insurance, and them be able to offer sort of a full suite of insurance products, but using data to be able to engage in those journeys. So that could be transactional data. That could be if you're, engaging with small businesses, that could be an opportunity for commercial insurance as an example, and be able to have more embedded insurance in the world. And even if we do not power it, we'd still love to have more embedded insurance in the world. And so I do think it's very much like a co-opetition space in insurance. It's not everybody sort of takes all, and we don't expect that, we'll get everybody. But even if folks are interested in embedded insurance, even if we can't help you, we'd love to point folks in the right way, because we'd just love to see more embedded insurance in market, more customers with the coverage that they like and need, and more ways for consumers to be able to quickly sort of get to their, destination, their journey with protection that they need. So we have a lot of wood to chop, a lot we can do to be able to try to accelerate that. We'd love to figure out, is it, AI that helps us get there a lot faster? What else might be on the horizon? But way more embedded insurance in the world, and to be able to power as much of that as we can.
Amazing. I love it. All right, we're going to wrap here. Before we do, if there's anyone listening in that just wants to follow along with you in this incredible journey, where should we send them? Where should they go?
You can just search for Walnut Insurance on LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to find us. We're, B2B2C, so that seems to be the place that we get most of the engagement.
Amazing. I love it. Thank you again for taking the time. It's been a blast.
Thanks, Brett. Really appreciate it.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.